The thing I want you to do is take it for a road test, do everything that you would do for safety, check all the lights. Before we start a ground-up restoration at Legendary Motorcar, we take it for a quick test drive. That drive can help us with the mechanical aspect of the restoration. We'll discover if all the gauges, accessories are working. We'll see if the drivetrain has any vibrations or any other problems, which aren't always obvious when we dismantle the car.
Feels like the back end's bottoming out a bit. Tranny doesn't seem too bad.
If you remember when this car came in, it actually looked pretty good. It was just an older restoration. Well, the first thing we did is we sent it out to the sandblaster, and after we get it back from the blaster, there are no more hidden secrets. This car has had patches on top of patches. They smoothed it out with body filler, actually did the undercarriage primer and overspray, didn't look too bad. It's a disaster. Car's had a good shot in the front here. You can see where the frame rail's been kinked. On the other side, you can see where they've actually tried to repair it. Now, there is a couple good things to this car. It's got the original inner aprons here with the numbers. Now, it does require a fair bit of repair here, but we're definitely not going to replace these panels. On a convertible, you really want to make sure about your inner rocker panels. This is why some cars fold up. You'll actually see the doors touching the top of the quarter panels here. The rockers, well, they don't look too bad. Even here, they look a little punky, but if you get at it, that car is going to fold right up if we don't replace the inner rocker panels. That's a big job. A lot of shops don't want to get involved in this. Obviously, to do this car right, it's the structure that's important. Somebody just made this thing up. It was a 3 dressed up as a 9. We're going to make it a 10. Well, there's absolutely no way any shop should attempt to do this sort of restoration in this thoroughly without having a surface plate. It has to be leveled. There's no way you can jig up a car without a surface plate properly. And there's no way that you should start any sort of work on this car without picking up the front suspension points, the outer rockers, not the inner rockers, because we're going to cut those out. We're going to pick up the points here at the rear torque boxes where the front of the leaf spring bolts to. We're going to also pick up the rear of the leaf spring where it bolts to the frame, and then you got to make sure in between the shock towers we brace it so the shock towers don't fold in this way. And in the door area here, we're going to triangulate it and make sure the car doesn't fold up at all this way. There's no way, again, that you should do this work unless you're prepared to go to this extent, because if you don't do this, the car is going to go down the road sideways, the doors won't close properly, the convertible top won't fit, and you're just going to have a giant mess. Well, before you can put in the convertible seat perches, you've got to put in the full one-piece floor. But before you can put in the one-piece floor, you've got to do a torque box on both sides. But before you can do the torque boxes, you have to do the front frame rails. Before you can do the front frame rails, you have to repair the main frame rail. Before you can do that, you've got to repair the back torque boxes. But before you can do that, you've got to put in these inner rockers. And before you get started, any of this, you've got a giant gaping hole here. When a car is as rough as this KR, it's going to require a lot of panel replacement. When these cars were originally produced, virtually every panel is spot welded into place. So if we replace a complete panel like the front rad cradle or the inner engine bay aprons, we'll drill the holes in the panel and we'll plug weld it into place. We'll then grind the high spots and we get basically the equivalent of a factory spot weld. For every other repair, we butt weld in all the panels. Quite often today's replacement panels aren't perfect in key areas, so we weld in part of the original panel in the case of this KR so the side scoop will fit in properly. The butt welding process is always the same. Make sure both pieces of metal are clean. It's impossible to properly weld dirt, paint, or rust. Tack the two panels together. The closer the fit here, the easier the welding process. You want to keep the welds fairly short. That will reduce the distortion due to the heat. Don't do one continuous bead all the way along. It will distort the metal severely. The next step is to crush the weld. The whole purpose behind crushing the weld is to actually repair the distortion caused by the heat. When the metal is heated up, the molecules will move very quickly. As the metal cools down, the molecules will shrink back actually further than the original position. So the molecules are actually stacked on top of one another. By hammering and dolling, you're actually moving the molecules back into their original position, flattening out the metal to the way it was before the welding process started. The best welds will require very little filler rod, making it more malleable and actually requiring less hammering and dolling later. The last step is to grind or file the weld, making it invisible. You can see that here with all three stages, from the raw weld to the crushed weld to the ground and finished invisible weld. That's how a proper butt weld is finished. One of the most overlooked parts of a restoration is the steering wheel. The irony in that is it's in front of you. You're holding it, you're looking at it constantly. Guys will spend hours and hours underneath the car and they'll neglect the steering wheel. Well, it takes about 16 hours, but it's well worth it. We happen to be doing a 69 Shelby steering wheel. We've already finished the one for our project car here. Let me take you through the steps. This is something you can do at home. This is how we do it. And this horn ring slides into this oak seam here. Now, if you pull this out and it breaks, it's about a $300 bill to get a new one. After you take that out, you've got to actually clean out the grooves, because when you put the old one back in or you put a new one in, you want to make sure it's nice and clean. The next piece you want to do is you want to remove the outside chrome strip. Lots of times this is cracked. So what we do is remove that chrome strip, and then you actually start to sand the wood grain. And what we do is we start with 40 grit paper. And the 40 grit will actually create some gouges in the plastic, and that's where the graining effect happens. Then we go to 80 and then to 120. Then what we'll do is we'll actually use an epoxy, and this epoxy here, it's a two-piece epoxy, will fill in that little recessed groove that chrome laminate strip was in, because we're going to use a pinstripe chrome. We can't get that correct laminate. Once that's filled in, we're ready to use this here, which is a walnut stain. And the more you put on, the darker the stain gets. So it depends how light or how dark you want the steering wheel. And you just take a cloth and you just keep wiping it around, going in the motion always of the steering wheel like a real wood grain wheel would be. Same thing when you're sanding it. Don't sand across this way. That's not the way the wood would lay. Keep going around like this. Once you've got that finished, you might want to take a little bit of black dye or paint and just wipe it off so it goes into those 40 grit sandpaper grooves and actually gives you that graining effects. Now that you've got the wood grain finished, you want to paint the rear of the steering wheel here. And this is just straight black, something pretty simple. Once that's finished, what you want to actually do is clear the entire steering wheel front and back. Now the only part you're missing now is this chrome strip. This chrome strip, you then scuff the entire wheel with a Scotch-Brite pad so you have something for the chrome to stick to and your last coat of clear to stick to. Put the chrome strip all the way around the wheel. Try and butt it up on the bottom of the steering wheel as opposed to the top, because your hand generally isn't down here, it's up here. Once that's done, you're ready for the final clear coat. Hang it up in a spray booth, clear the entire thing, give it 3 good coats so it actually buries this chrome strip into part of the steering wheel. The next thing that you want to do is you want to refinish the center. And this is pretty simple. All you have to do is clean it real well with degreaser, make sure that there's no marks or grooves in it, and use a Marhide, which is basically a vinyl dye. Clean out, put in a new emblem, clean out all the little corners here, and you've got a brand new looking wheel. Well, anytime you're doing a 6-figure restoration, obviously you're going to do the steering wheel. But if you have a spare weekend and a couple bucks for material, it's well worth doing at home. Once you get that steering wheel in place on one of these 68s, the next thing is to get the tilt swing away working. You know, we get a lot of calls here at Legendary Motorcar. Guys asking, where do you get the information on what's right on the restoration? Well, there's a couple of different places. One of them is great original cars like this. I just bought this car. It's a nothing car, but you know what excites me about this car is all the information it's going to give up on how these cars were built on the assembly line. You can see this bare spot around the plug here. Well, when it went down the assembly line, there was a washer that sat on top of that to hold it in place. When they painted it, there was no paint here. You can see a little bit of surface rust. You can see the way they taped down the wiring harness right here. You have the original location of that. You also have some of the original stickers on the marker light assembly. Under the hood, there's a lot more information to be had on this car. Looks like a greasy engine bay ready for a used car lot. Well, if you look a little beyond that, you can see some of the original sticker locations here and here. You can see some of the original stamping, OK3, some of the chalk marks. If you have a close look at the frame, you can see the 526. That's one place we can get information from, is documenting great original cars. There's a couple other spots as well. Well, a couple other places to find information on the correct detail, good magazine articles. Guys have spent a lot of hours researching them. And other places at the car shows. We'll go there with a digital camera now. In the old days, we went with a regular camera. We photographed all the great original cars for their markings. Well, once you have the information, what do you do with it? You're trying to duplicate those markings. Well, the Markel paint sticks, these were the original ones that the guys used down the assembly line. They're easy to buy. We can get these. As far as the paint daubs and stuff, well, they had a different sort of marker. What we use is model paint here in various brushes. We can duplicate just about any of the paint marks. Now, as far as some of the original stencils, what we've done is anytime we find an original piece like a voltage regulator with the right part number, the engineering number on it, we get a stamp made. We simply spray on that stamp and then we can duplicate it. This original oil filter, it's going to have an engineering number. There's the engineering number. We'll spray it on. We'll simply stamp it on here, and it's ready to go on the motor. Now, Chris is just finishing off the detail on this Cobra Jet motor going in our Cobra Jet KR convertible. There's lots of little things to worry about. One of those is hardware. Hardware we can buy now from, for the most part, AMK sells a lot of hardware, the right finish, the right heads, the right logos on it, and it's pretty simple now, and it's all bagged ready to go. Now, as far as all the tiny detail stuff, what we're finding now is with the rising prices of restoration or original NOS parts, what we're doing is we're doing a lot of reproduction pieces like the fan belts and the items that are readily available. What this gives is the owner the option later. It's concourse correct, but if he wants to go NOS or trailered concourse or thoroughbred, which is all NOS parts, he has the option of removing this fan belt, finding the original one at a flea market or paying through the nose for it and then replacing it. But the rest of the car, all the hard stuff, is already set to go. That's what we're doing with this KR convertible. Now, what you can see here is all the chalk marks. Like I said, the Markel paint sticks. This would have been the center line. The 241 would have been the car on that shift. It was the 241 car going down the assembly line for that shift. The guy assembling the car would have looked at the build sheet, and where it says front springs, it would have said, you know, pink and gold. What that meant is he went to the bin, he picked up the pink and gold one. He didn't have to decide what spring rate. The little X's here usually represent hardware that needed to be torqued. So the guy going down, the inspector would go down and say, okay, that's been torqued, he'd put an X there. All of these little markings are what makes the difference between a concourse car and just a nice driver. This car's gonna go to the Nationals, it's gotta be right. Well, there's so much going on here at the Shelby convention. You've got a race, we've got an R model here that we're gonna show. It's kind of interesting, we brought 4 cars down here. We brought one for sale, the KR convertible. We also brought a race car that Peter Sauer's gonna get out on the track. It's only his second race. We brought the R model that's gonna go in the concourse, and of course we brought the car that we've been working on for the last 4 episodes, the KR convertible here. It's just about ready to show. But before you bring it here, there's a lot of little tweaking you can do back at the shop to get it ready for any show. Let's go through those now. If you're gonna do a final high-speed polish, it's not a bad idea to use some tape along the edges. If you're not careful here, you'll burn the car just before it's ready to hit the show field. Using a high-speed machine, just go slow, take it easy, and be careful, and always run off the panel. Take a blower gun, make sure all the compound is out of all the nooks and crannies. If it's easy to get to, why not remove it, clean behind it, clean the back of the trim, and replace the trim. For the interior, there's some specialty items that you can use as well. Brushes to make sure that you get in all the threaded areas of the dash, in all the grille areas of the door jamb. Socks aren't a bad idea to use to protect the pedal pads. Remove them when you're on the show field and they look brand new. All the finishing touches like the starting instructions on the sun visor add those extra points. As far as detailing the seats, make sure you use a seat dressing or upholstery dressing that isn't shiny so it doesn't look like it just came out of a cheap cleanup shop. After that's all done, protect the seat with a cover. Under the hood, it's those final touches like all the grease pencil marks that get you those extra points. Make sure the engine is as clean as the undercarriage, as clean as the top. Judges look for workmanship just about everywhere. My pet peeve is always glass. It's got to be perfect both from the inside and out. Don't be shy to remove cardboard covers or floor mats or trunk mats to make sure it's clean behind. Rims and tires are just as important. Washing behind to get all the brake dust is just as important as the front. At Legendary Motorcar, we have a reverse osmosis system as well as a special filtration system. Therefore, the water won't leave any watermarks, you won't have any iron buildup, and it'll leave the car spot-free. Our 5-car hauler will take the car down to the Shelby convention at VIR. Once it's loaded into the trailer, don't be shy to cover it with a plastic sheet again. We're finally at the show. The SAC concourse judges will be scrutinizing every part of the car. They'll be looking for originality.
Finish correct? Yes, fine. Bolts and hardware? Perfect.
They'll be judging workmanship. And of course, they'll be looking for the correct parts. The KR placed extremely well in the Division 1 class with a silver. The R model received the highest award possible, a Division I Premier Award. Not a bad day for the two cars from Legendary Motorcar, considering these are some of the toughest judges you'll ever run across at any concourse anywhere.